Hey guys, tonight we're drifting into a time when feeling sad wasn't something you talked about over tea, and anxiety didn't come with a diagnosis. It came with incense, cold stares, and maybe a priest waving holy water in your general direction. You're waking up in a narrow bed of straw, still wrapped in your cloak, because it's easier than finding the energy to start the fire. You've slept, but not really. More like floated, heavy in your bones, distant in your mind. Your neighbor already whispered it this morning. He's not right in the head, and you haven't even left your cottage yet. You probably won't survive this century, not because of plague or famine, but because nobody here understands what's happening inside your head. And if they do, they're going to try to burn it out, pray it out, or walk you out of town. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it over there? Drop your location and local time in the comments so we can see how far this sleepy little cottage reaches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You sit on the edge of the bed and stare at the wall, trying to remember if today is the feast of St. Matthias or the day the pig cart arrives. You're not sure. You're not sure of a lot lately. Your thoughts feel like soup, thick, murky, and sloshing in too many directions. You try to stand, but the weight in your limbs insists you sit again. So you do. In the medieval world, there are no psychologists, no therapy dogs, no pamphlets about burnout. There's you, your local priest, and possibly an exorcist if things get loud enough. Mental health isn't treated, it's judged, feared, or mystified. If you confess your sadness, your melancholy, your lack of will to rise, people might say you're cursed, or worse, possessed. The line between emotionally unwell and spiritually dangerous is blurry at best. That's how you find yourself sitting across from Father Oswin in the cold stone chapel later that afternoon. You try to explain the fog in your mind, the weight in your chest, the dreams that feel more real than your days. He listens, nods once, and reaches for his prayer book. He suggests fasting and prayer, and perhaps visiting the shrine of a local saint known for lifting darkness. You nod, because what else can you do? There's no vocabulary for what you're feeling, not one that doesn't end in suspicion or ritual cleansing. People speak of melancholy as if it were a passing storm. But your storm has taken up residence, built a home, hung curtains. Saint Dymphna is whispered about in some parts, a holy woman said to watch over the disturbed in spirit. Her shrine attracts the families of those who wander or wail or weep too much. You think about asking to go there, but the journey would take days, and you're not sure you can walk across the room. Back in your cottage, a neighbor stops by. She offers you a poultice of crushed chamomile and a story about her uncle who started talking to the cows one spring. He was made to sleep in the barn and eventually wandered off into the woods. He's at peace now, she says. You're not sure what that means. That night, the villagers gather to tell stories. You stay home. There's a fringe belief, especially among healers, that sadness can be drawn out with rituals involving herbs and whispered songs. One woman in the next town is known for gently placing rosemary at the corners of a room and humming until the air feels lighter. Some say it works, some say it's nonsense. Historians still argue whether such remedies were folk magic or proto-therapy. You try placing rosemary by your own bed. You hum softly. It doesn't fix anything, but you feel a little less alone. The candle burns low. The air grows colder. Tomorrow, someone might tell you to smile more, to be grateful. to walk to the river and dunk your head in. Maybe it will help, maybe it won't. But for now, you lie in bed, eyes open, breath slow. You listen to the wind through the gaps in the shutters, and for the first time today, your thoughts go quiet. And that's it. You wake up to rain tapping softly on the thatch above your head. It's a rhythmic sound, almost comforting, but your body feels as though it's been soaked from the inside out. Still heavy, still slow. You sit upright, pull your cloak around your shoulders, and begin to wonder, what's wrong with me? That's when the village healer drops by. Not because you asked, someone else did. Probably your neighbor. The one who whispers too much. The healer is old, stern, and smells like vinegar. She doesn't ask you how you're feeling. She asks what color your urine is, how much you've eaten, and whether your stools are formed. You answer awkwardly. She nods, knowingly, and mutters the phrase that defines medieval mental health more than anything else. It's the humors. In the medieval world, your mind doesn't have problems. Your body does. And it's leaking emotions through an imbalance of fluids. The four humors: blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm. They swirl inside you, invisible but powerful, ruling your moods like tiny tyrants with no regard for modern neuroscience. Too much black bile? You're melancholic, depressed, sluggish, maybe even contemplative. Too much yellow bile? Angry, short-tempered, restless. If your humors are hot and wet, you might be excitable. Cold and dry, withdrawn, fearful, a little too fond of sitting in dark rooms staring into space. Today she diagnoses you with an excess of black bile. The cure? Probably a purgative, or leeches, or, if you're lucky, just some warm broth with thyme and a long nap. She reaches into her pouch and hands you a bitter herb wrapped in cheesecloth. Steep this, she says, until the sadness comes out in your sweat. You nod, clutching the bundle like it contains answers. It doesn't, but it feels like doing something. And sometimes, that's enough to get through the day. The humoral theory dominates everything. Your mood is physical. Your mind is a vessel sloshing with substances you can neither see nor control. And if you're weeping for no reason, they won't ask about your past. They'll ask about your liver. You think about how much easier it would be if you were bleeding. If your sadness was something they could bandage or stitch or set straight like a broken limb. But instead, they'll check your pulse, sniff your breath, and tell you to avoid figs and red meat for a week. You try. You really do. There's a quirky treatment gaining popularity among traveling physicians, balancing humors with music. Literally. One healer claims that a lute played in the correct melancholic mode can draw excess black bile toward the ears, where it dissipates. You ask if they're joking. They're not. So that night, someone plays a slow tune on a battered lute while you lie in bed, breathing as quietly as possible. It sounds mournful, but in a strangely reassuring way, like the music knows how you feel. You don't sweat out sadness, but you do sleep better. Not everyone agrees on which humors do what. Historians still argue whether medieval thinkers truly believed in the fluids themselves, or whether the humors were just a metaphor for what we now call mental states. Either way, it shaped every diagnosis for centuries. Even personality is defined by humors. You learn that you're melancholic. Your cousin is choleric, hot-tempered, and always red in the face. Your neighbor? Phlegmatic, slow-moving, calm, possibly asleep under that tree. It's a system. Rigid, simplistic, but it gives people something to name, and nameable things are less terrifying. You sit by the hearth later that night, sipping your bitter tea, and wondering if it's working. You feel no different, but you tell yourself you might. Tomorrow, maybe. And when your neighbor asks how you're feeling, you say, "My bile is settling." They nod, like that means something. By the third day, your melancholy has become a companion, quiet, persistent, and oddly polite. It follows you like a shadow, keeping pace but never speaking first. You wake with it, walk with it, sit across from it at supper. Everyone around you notices, but no one says the word you wish existed. Instead, they say, maybe he's got a demon in his stomach. Or worse, it's the devil whispering in his ear again. You pause mid-spoonful of broth. You're not sure which image is worse. In medieval Europe, sadness that overstayed its welcome often slipped beyond the realm of medicine and into the arms of religion. And not in a soft, soothing way. If you were too sad for too long, too withdrawn, too quiet or tearful, people started suspecting spiritual interference. Your melancholy might just be melancholy. Or it might be demonic temptation. You overhear a priest telling someone that chronic sadness is the devil's sieve, where the weak get sifted. You sip your tea more slowly after that. People talk about spiritual dryness, a soul out of alignment, drifting from God, weighed down by the world. They say it happens to monks especially. Some call it acedia, a kind of holy boredom so heavy it feels like drowning in sand. You feel seen, but also possibly accused. Acedia wasn't always seen as a sin. At first, it was more of a spiritual condition, but by the 12th century, it hardened into something dangerous. Too much listlessness meant you were turning your back on your duties, your prayers, your community. It wasn't a feeling anymore. It was laziness. Defiance. Something to confess. You spend more time at church, lighting candles that melt too fast. You try to sing, but your voice comes out thin. Still, you try. You even kneel longer than usual, though your knees ache and your thoughts drift. You tell yourself it's just the moon. That's a thing people say, he's melancholy when the moon is full. You look out the window one night and see it hovering low and white over the treetops. You try blaming the moon. It feels better than blaming yourself. There's a fringe belief gaining traction in your region, that certain demons cause specific moods. A slow, sighing sadness? That's Belphegor. A racing, anxious dread? That's Zozo, or at least, that's what the old widow down the road insists. She carries rosemary in her pockets to keep him out of her dreams. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were metaphorical ways of describing emotion or genuine fears held by a deeply spiritual population. Either way, you keep a sprig of rosemary under your pillow now. It can't hurt. And then there's the exorcism rumor. Not the dramatic, Hollywood kind. The local kind. Quiet prayers, blessed water, whispered Latin over someone who hasn't smiled in a month. You hear of a boy in the next village who was taken to the cathedral after claiming he saw shapes in the fire. He came back quiet, still sad. But now everyone calls him healed. You wonder what healed means in this context. You wonder if your own shadows would leave under holy water, or if they've simply grown too comfortable. One afternoon, you visit the local healer again. She looks at you, hands you a cup of something warm and thick, and says, "It's the changing air. That's all. Melancholy travels with the wind. It'll pass." You sip the cup, not believing her, but enjoying the lie. She tells you a joke about her husband confusing a frog for a saint in the dark. You laugh barely. But even that laugh feels like movement, like air in the corners of a sealed room. The truth is, everyone's afraid of what they can't explain. If sadness doesn't bleed, it gets blamed. So you become quieter. You practice smiling in the mirror, just enough to ease suspicion. You go to church, light your candle, walk to the fields, and try to feel the sun through your tunic. And you tell yourself, it's not possession, it's not bile, It's just something passing through, like wind, like moonlight, like a very quiet guest. You're walking to the market square today, slowly, with no real reason but to prove you still can. And as you pass the churchyard, you spot him. Everyone calls him Touched. No one uses a real name. Maybe they don't remember it. Maybe they never asked. He sits on a low stone wall, just beyond the chapel's shadow, humming to himself and tying bits of string around his fingers in complicated loops. He talks sometimes to birds, to clouds, to invisible people only he can see. He's always barefoot, no matter the weather. And he always smiles, though not necessarily at anyone. You pause. He looks up, waves. You wave back. In this moment, you realize something strange. He's not shunned. Not really. People give him space, yes. But they also hand him bread, wrap a spare cloak around his shoulders in winter, even pat his head when he drifts too close to the ale cart. You're not sure if he's feared or revered, or maybe both. In medieval Europe, the boundary between madness and mysticism was flexible. Someone who behaved oddly might be a lunatic or a prophet, or in rare cases, a saint in training. Some people thought those touched by mental strangeness had a window open to heaven. Others thought it was the devil blowing the curtains. It all depended on how useful your madness was. If you screamed and ran naked through town, dangerous. If you muttered holy-sounding phrases while staring into the sun, mysterious. And if you didn't cause trouble, didn't challenge authority, didn't spit in anyone's soup, you were mostly tolerated. There are stories of fools kept at noble courts, not locked away, but employed. Entertainers, truth-tellers, people allowed to say what others couldn't, under the cloak of madness. It's unclear whether these individuals had mental illnesses or were simply playing a role, but their presence was accepted, even valued. A safety valve for a rigid society. You think again of the man on the wall. He's not sick, they say. He's blessed oddly. You sit beside him. He offers you a bit of string. You take it. You tie it around your thumb, not sure why, but grateful for the company. He hums a little louder. You try to match the note. Your eyes meet. No words needed. In some regions, the mentally unwell were seen as close to nature, closer to God, closer to something other. It wasn't sympathy. It was awe, or fear, or both. You recall a woman in the next town who started painting saints with ash on the barn walls. No one stopped her. They just prayed louder. There's a fringe belief that certain kinds of madness were sent by the heavens to test a village's kindness. A wandering holy fool might bring blessings or curses, depending on how you treated them. Historians still argue whether this was a widespread belief or a comforting story told by nicer-than-average people. Either way, you treat this moment with reverence. You leave the market with nothing in your hands, but a bit of twine still looped around your wrist. A gift from the touched man. You keep it there. You like how it reminds you of something unspoken, something soft. Back at home, you think about what it would be like to stop pretending. To speak your sadness out loud, to sit on a wall and hum. Would they call you touched? Would they feed you bread? Would they let you be? You don't know, but you look at the string again, and it makes your fingers feel warm, and that's something. The wind picks up as you climb the narrow hill behind the village, feet dragging through wet leaves and roots. You're not looking for anything, not exactly, just walking. Away from the market noise, away from the looks, away from yourself, if that were possible. At the top of the slope stands the old monastery, grey, quiet, and stern-looking, like a man who's seen too much. The bell doesn't ring often these days. A few monks remain, keeping rhythms no one else hears, You go to visit Brother Marcus. He doesn't speak much anymore. He tends the herb garden, sweeps the stone paths, and stares into corners like they might open up and tell him something. People say he's been like this since the incident, though no one agrees on what that was. Some say he lost his brother in the plague. Others say he heard voices during a fast and never recovered. You only know that when you sit beside him, he doesn't flinch. He doesn't talk, but he doesn't mind your silence either. In monastic life, silence is sacred. But sometimes, silence becomes something else, not a vow, but a symptom. You watch him trim thyme with a focus that borders on obsession. He lines the stems in a perfect row, then rearranges them into a different one. It's soothing to him. And you, strangely. Mental struggle within monasteries was often hidden behind prayer and obedience. If a monk wept during Vespers, it was holy sorrow. If he refused to eat, it was discipline. If he withdrew from others, it was contemplation. But you get the sense that sometimes it was just depression, or trauma, or a mind trying to escape itself. Historians still argue how much monastic silence was spiritual, and how much was emotional withdrawal rebranded. In an age without psychology, prayer was both cure and cover. You glance around the cloister, clean walls, tidy stone, lavender drying near the kitchen entrance. Everything here is meant to calm, to quiet the noise in your head. It helps until it doesn't. Brother Marcus hums softly now, not unlike the man from the market wall. You wonder if they're humming the same tune, passed along some invisible thread between people who live slightly sideways from the rest of the world. There's a quirky belief in this monastery, an old one, that bees can carry thoughts. If you whisper to a hive, they'll take your sorrow away. You find the hive tucked beneath an overhang. You don't speak, but you think at the bees, just in case. Inside the scriptorium, other monks are copying texts, slowly, deliberately. You recognize a psalm being inked in careful Latin script. My soul is weary with sorrow. Strengthen me according to your word. You recognize a psalm being inked in careful Latin script. My soul is weary with sorrow. Strengthen me according to your word. You read it again and again. You want to believe that words can strengthen. That ink can carry pain safely onto the page, away from the skin. Later, Brother Marcus hands you a small bundle of dried chamomile. He still hasn't spoken. You nod your thanks. He smiles, barely. As you leave, you wonder how many others like him have passed through these halls. How many monks came here to find peace and instead discovered only deeper corners of their own mind? How many stayed because the world outside had even fewer answers? And you wonder, if you stopped speaking, stopped pretending, stopped trying, would they give you a robe? A cell? A bowl of lentils and permission to unravel in silence? It's tempting. But instead, you walk back down the hill, chamomile in your pocket, wind at your back, and a prayer stuck in your throat that you don't quite know the words for. The next time you visit the village square, she's gone. You ask the baker's wife where she went, the woman who always wore her shawl too tight, spoke too fast, and flinched at loud noises. The one who used to wring her hands until they turned red, always murmuring about the wolves in the woods, even when it was sheep season. The one who cried at the wrong times and laughed at the wrong times, and once stayed in bed for 3 days straight while her husband made excuses to the neighbors. She was taken, the baker's wife says, wiping flour from her sleeves. Too much trouble. Taken where? She shrugs. To the convent, maybe, or to the priest's sister's house. Somewhere quieter. But you know what that means. In medieval life, mental health wasn't just misunderstood, it was often gendered. Women who spoke too much, questioned too much, worried too much, or, heaven forbid, got angry too much, were labeled with words that curled and cut: hysterica, possessed, witch. And the line between anxiety and heresy? Hair thin. You remember how that woman used to whisper to her bread while kneading it, as if afraid it might speak back? You remember how she once looked straight through you, eyes glassy with something like fear or knowledge? You remember how other women began to avoid her? In medieval medical texts, women were often treated as inherently weaker in mind and body, more susceptible to wandering wombs, unstable humors, and spiritual corruption. Their mental anguish wasn't often called melancholy. It was more often called danger. A woman who wept too much might be given calming herbs. But if she kept weeping, a priest would be summoned. If she spoke in riddles, it might be poetry. Or it might be sorcery. There's a fringe practice in some towns. When a woman seems too anxious, too angry, too erratic, she's subjected to floating, tied loosely and placed in water. If she sinks, she's innocent. If she floats, she's a witch. Either way, she ends up soaked, shivering, and ashamed. Historians still argue whether such tests were widespread or rare sensationalism. But for women like the one now gone, the fear was always real. You hear whispers from the weaver's daughter. They took her to a stone room with no windows and salted the doorway. Someone painted crosses in ash on the floor. Someone said, she was hearing things. Someone said, she wanted too much. And you wonder, what if she was just overwhelmed? What if the pressure of baking for 5 children, of mourning 3 stillbirths, of keeping quiet when her thoughts were screaming, what if it simply cracked her? And no one knew how to hold that? So they locked it away. There's a poem carved into the convent gate near the next town over. It says, "Let silence mend what sound unravels." You're not sure it's true. You pass by her house later. The shutters are closed. The garden is overgrown. Someone has pulled up the rosemary bush. Her husband nods at you from the porch, eyes tired. You nod back, but neither of you say anything. What could you say? That you understand? That sometimes you want to run? That maybe she wasn't mad at all, but just unheard for too long. Instead, you return home, sit in your doorway, and crumble a bit of dried chamomile from Brother Marcus into your tea. You sip slowly. You imagine her kneading dough, whispering safety into it. You wish someone had whispered safety into her, and you wonder how many others will vanish quietly before anyone learns to ask the right questions. That night, you dream of walking through water. Not a river, not a lake, just water, deep and slow, spreading through your house like fog with weight. It soaks the hearth, curls around the bedposts, slides up to your ribs. You keep walking, but the door never comes. The air buzzes with distant chanting. A bell tolls, faint but steady. You don't wake with a start, you wake with a sigh. You sit up in the dark and realize you've been talking in your sleep again. Not moaning or shouting, just quiet mutters, half-formed words drifting out of your mouth like smoke. And someone heard. Your sister stands in the doorway with a candle, her eyes wide and tired. You were saying things, she whispers, about birds, and bones, and something burning. You shrug. You don't remember the birds. She watches you like someone studying a wild animal, uncertain if it will bite or speak prophecy. In the morning, you hear the whispers. Dreamers are being watched. In medieval Europe, dreams carried power. They weren't dismissed as nonsense or background noise. They were messages from God, from the saints, from darker places. To dream vividly, especially to speak in your sleep, was to open a door. The question was always, to where? you recall the story of a boy from the next village who claimed he dreamed of St. Cuthbert walking across a frozen lake. The priest called it divine. The boy was celebrated. But another girl dreamed of fire and black wings. She was quietly sent to a convent before anyone could ask more questions. What separates prophecy from madness? Historians still argue about this. Was the dreamer chosen or cursed? Were their visions spiritual or simply mental illness, refracted through a world without modern psychology? You, now lying back in bed, don't feel divine or dangerous, just tired. In some texts, certain dreams are classified by origin. Visio, from God. Visio, from God. Visio, from God. Visio, from God. Visio, from demons. Insomnium, from overeating. You wonder which one you've just had, and whether the eel you ate yesterday might be partially to blame. You begin keeping a small scrap of parchment near your bed, not to write the dreams, but to record how you felt. Calm, afraid, distant. It helps you feel a little more in control, as if naming the shadow might shrink it. There's a fringe belief among lay healers that people who talk in their sleep are actually two-souled. One soul wakes, the other wanders. If it goes too far, it may not come back. That's why some people tie ribbons around their wrists at night to anchor the soul. You consider it. You try to talk about your dreams with the parish priest. He listens kindly at first. Then he asks if you've been praying enough. You say you think so. He tells you to sleep with a psalm under your pillow anyway. You try it. It feels like placing a shield made of paper over a sea made of glass. Your sister now watches you sleep. She means well. But her fear makes you nervous. You start pretending to be asleep when you're not. You start waking up mid-sentence, unsure if you're dreaming or just drifting. You wonder if this is how madness begins, not with fire or screaming, but with gentle unraveling. Thread by thread. You miss the man from the chapel wall. You wonder what his dreams sound like. You wonder if anyone ever tried to listen without flinching. One night, you dream of bees again. They're carrying smoke in their wings. They hum a psalm you can't quite remember. You wake to find your mouth moving, though no sound escapes. This time you don't tell anyone. You just get up, rinse your face, and tie a soft red ribbon around your wrist. Just your feet hurt. You've walked all day, across moor and mud, through villages where people stare just long enough to make you feel like a ghost. No one stops you. No one offers food. But they watch. You're on pilgrimage, not because you want to be, because they told you it might help. Your priest, your sister, even the healer with her dry hands and sharp eyes, they all agreed that your sadness, your unquiet mind, might ease if you went somewhere holy, somewhere with saints, relics, and the kind of air that makes people forget to ask too many questions. You weren't given many choices, just a direction, east, toward the shrine of a minor saint who once healed a mad knight with a kiss and a cup of spring water, or so they say. So you walk. Your pack is light, dried bread, a pinch of salt, a sliver of wax for lighting prayers, and your little scrap of parchment tucked between linen layers close to your chest. You haven't written on it since the dream of the bees, but you keep it near. The road is long, and your thoughts stretch with it. In medieval times, pilgrimage was one of the few socially acceptable ways to step outside yourself, geographically and emotionally. A cure for spiritual ills, a reset for the weary, and sometimes an exile in disguise. They say a good pilgrimage can burn the sin out of your bones. They also say it's harder to hear demons when you're tired enough to see stars in daylight. You pass shrines along the way, small ones, little more than carved stones with melted wax and bits of ribbon tied to them. You touch each one, not because you believe exactly, but because it feels rude not to. There's a quirky tradition in some areas. Leave a pebble at every shrine, to mark each burden you wish to leave behind. You start doing that. Your pockets get lighter. The road stays the same. You sleep rough, under hedges, in barns, once in the ruins of an old chapel where someone left bread and a note that simply said, "Don't be afraid." You want to believe it was meant for you. When you finally arrive at the shrine, your legs ache, your throat is dry, and your sadness is quieter. Not gone, but softened. The shrine is small. A wooden box containing a shard of bone, a linen scrap, a story no one can quite verify. People kneel, touch it, cry. Some laugh. One woman faints. You kneel too. And you whisper the first real sentence you've said in days. "Please don't let me go home the same." There's a moment of stillness that follows. No visions, no voice, just your own breath, and the sudden realization that the stillness feels nice. You sleep that night in a small hostel near the shrine. The air smells like beeswax and thyme. A monk brings you broth and tells you that half the pilgrims here are looking for healing that no one can see. Some carry broken bones, he says. Some carry broken thoughts. You nod. He places a small token in your palm. A bit of smooth glass, colored green. "Keep it," he says, "for when you forget that the road ever ended." Historians still debate whether pilgrimage truly offered healing, or just distraction, exhaustion, and distance. But for many, it was the only journey that made suffering feel like movement instead of stagnation. You walk home slowly, not healed, not whole, but different. When you return, the village looks smaller. Not physically, just somehow shrunk by your absence. The paths are still muddy. The market still smells like onions and boiled leather. But everyone seems to be speaking a little quieter now. Or maybe you're just hearing differently. The healer sees you first. She peers at your face, your hands, your posture. "Did the saint fix you?" she asks, only half joking. You shrug. "I think I'm different." She grunts. "Different's fine. Better than nothing." She sends you home with a new bundle of herbs, this time wrapped in silk instead of twine. "For the nerves," she says, "and maybe the ghosts." You don't ask what she means by ghosts. You know. That night, you brew a tea from the bundle. It smells like honey and wood smoke, bitter at the edges. It's a mix you've seen her give to soldiers, and mothers who lost children, and sometimes to herself. You sip it slowly. You do not float. You do not dream. You just feel still. Medieval herbal remedies were rarely precise. Healers worked with what they had: valerian for restlessness, lemon balm for fear, lavender for sorrow. The mind and body weren't treated separately. If your spirit hurt, they gave you something for the stomach. If your stomach ached, they said you were grieving. You remember one young boy who screamed in his sleep for a month after his father drowned. The healer smeared honey on his eyelids and sang to him in Breton. "To sweeten the mind," she said. He stopped screaming. But then he stopped speaking. The village said he'd been healed. You wonder. There's a quirky belief in your region that nettles can banish despair if boiled under a full moon and drunk while barefoot. You've never tried it, but you've seen footprints near the river in the morning, small, careful prints leading toward the reeds. Someone believes it works. You begin to learn the herbs by smell. You crush leaves between your fingers. You ask questions. You watch how the healer tests remedies not on sick people first, but on sad ones. Historians still argue whether these remedies had genuine chemical effects or worked through suggestion and ritual. But you don't care. If something helps, even a little, you keep it. Some days you help in the garden, sorting roots, drying petals, wrapping thyme into little bundles. The rhythm helps. The scent calms your hands, which have begun to shake less. You begin sleeping better. Not because the sadness has left, but because you've made peace with its presence. Like an old house guest who takes up space but no longer knocks over the dishes. People begin asking you what herbs help with sleep, or restlessness, or sorrow that presses on the chest like wet linen. You answer softly. Try mint at dawn, valerian at dusk, and walk if you can, even just to the well. You don't call it healing. You just call it tending. It's market day again, and for once, you're not just watching, you're moving. You're there to sell herbs bundled with twine, pressed between linen squares, labeled in your own shaky handwriting. A few people even nod at you. A few smile. And then you see him, the madman from the market square. Except this time, you really see him. He's barefoot, as always, a smear of mud across one cheek, a cluster of feathers tied into his belt like they've been there for years. He's pacing in slow circles near the well, muttering, laughing, scolding the air. And no one stops him. No one mocks him. No one says a word. A small child hands him an apple. He takes it, bows so low his forehead nearly touches the cobblestone, then wanders off, trailing bits of song in his wake. You realize, with a start, that he's part of this market. Just folded in. No explanation, no intervention, no one trying to fix him. In some towns, the village madman was seen as a fixture, not hidden away, not institutionalized, not that such places truly existed yet, but absorbed into the fabric of daily life. He was strange, he was sacred, he was a warning, he was a reminder, and he was left alone. You remember what someone said once, "He's lost too much." That's all. As if the equation of suffering equals strangeness made perfect sense. There's a bench by the far wall. You sit, watch. He begins spinning in slow circles, arms raised. Someone says, "He's calling the sun again." And they just let him. No laughs, no scorn. A fringe belief exists here that people who've gone mad are actually just listening to different music. Some say they walk closer to the angels. Others say they hear the thoughts of the town, all at once. You don't know. But you like that idea. Historians still argue whether these public figures were pitied, tolerated, or quietly revered. It probably depended on the village, on the man, on the day. You sip a bit of herb tea from a flask tucked into your belt, the same one you brewed yesterday, for your own steadiness. You've started giving it away in tiny cloth sachets. Most people thank you. Some look at you funny. One asked if you had anything for thoughts that won't leave you alone. You handed her mint and mugwort. She returned the next day with clearer eyes. You wonder how many madmen started like that. Just someone with thoughts that wouldn't leave. You think back to your pilgrimage, to the bees in your dreams, to the string around your wrist, to the silence of the monastery and the woman who vanished, and the prayers whispered through cracked lips to saints with no names. You see all of it in the man dancing near the bread cart, and for a moment you feel grateful. Not because you're better, but because you're not alone. He spins again, arms wide. You lift one hand, barely, and he sees you, and bows. There's a feast in the village tonight. St. Elfrida's Day, though no one can quite remember what she's the patron saint of. Some say weaving. Others say forgiveness. A few insist she once healed a man by hitting him with a spoon. Either way, there's stew and song, and that's enough. You don't usually come to these things. Too loud. Too many faces. But tonight, something pulls you toward the square. By the time you arrive, the fires are already glowing, spitting sparks into the dusk. The air smells like roasted onions and ale. Children dart between skirts and boots, chasing chickens that clearly didn't sign up for this. And then the laughing starts, deep, wild, contagious. It begins with a man near the cart of stale buns. Someone says something about a goat. Then another joins in. A woman snorts into her drink. Soon, half the square is chuckling, no one really knowing why. You can't help yourself, you laugh too. And for the first time in weeks, it doesn't feel borrowed. In medieval times, joy was medicinal. Not in the poetic sense, in the actual, prescriptive way. Laughter, mirth, even absurdity were believed to chase away the fog of the mind. That dark cloud we'd now call depression. It could be pierced, they thought, by music, by jokes, by spectacle. That's why villages like yours held Feast of Fools celebrations, topsy-turvy days when the rules collapsed and hilarity reigned. The priest might wear a pig mask. The mayor might be pelted with bread. People shouted nonsense in Latin and pretended that chaos cured. And maybe it did, in its way. There's a man juggling vegetables on a barrel now. He's not very good. The turnip drops every third toss, but everyone cheers like he's a king. You feel something unlock in your chest. Not release exactly, just a loosening. You wander past a pair of minstrels playing mismatched pipes, a dog wearing a cape, and an old woman shouting fortunes that change every time she blinks. Someone grabs your hand. A dance begins. It's not elegant, more of a lurch and stumble. But it works. You move in a circle, laughing, breathless, as firelight flickers across faces both joyful and strange. Someone lets out a warbling cackle. Someone else responds with a bleat. There's a fringe belief here, passed down by shepherds and shoemakers, that madness can be danced away. That laughter smokes out the sadness. That absurdity rattles the demons loose. Some say it only works under moonlight. Some say it only works if you wear bells on your knees. No one agrees, but they dance anyway. Historians still argue whether such festivals were true expressions of communal joy or just pressure valves for a tightly wound society. Either way, tonight, it feels like medicine. The madman from the square is here too. He's spinning again, but now people dance with him. Children trail after his steps like he's the Pied Piper of joy. You see someone hand him a flower crown. He wears it without hesitation. You think about how sadness isolates, how it convinces you that laughter is for other people. But tonight, you laugh. Not the hollow kind, the real kind, the snort through your nose kind. And no one calls you strange for it. Later, you sit at the edge of the square, cheeks sore, watching the embers drift skyward like fireflies. A young girl offers you a piece of honey cake. You take it. She smiles. You eat slowly. You don't forget the heaviness. It's still there, folded somewhere behind your ribs. But tonight, it's quieter, drowsier. Like it too has been worn out by all this laughing. And for the first time in a long while, you feel like you might sleep easy. The moon is full tonight, so full it casts shadows. You lie awake, staring at the ceiling as if it might explain why your heart feels restless again, even after the feast, even after the laughter. You roll over. The moonlight follows. You wrap your cloak tighter. It's not the cold that's unsettling, it's the tugging in your chest. Like something pulling your thoughts loose from their moorings. Your sister swears the moon is to blame. It brings out the sleepwalkers, she says. And the ones who talk too much. She means well. There's a word she's heard at market, lunaticus, from lunar, the moon. People say it makes minds unravel. It stirs up madness, especially in those already teetering. You're starting to believe it. In medieval Europe, Mental unrest was often linked to the moon. Its phases were believed to govern not just the tides, but the blood, the bones, the mind. A full moon was suspect, a waxing moon, watchful, a new moon, merciful or ominous, depending on whom you asked. Physicians consulted moon charts. They timed treatments around lunar cycles. Don't bleed the melancholic when the moon is full, one manual warns, lest he become a beast. Tonight you feel it, not bestial, just restless. Words flit through your thoughts too fast to catch. You stand, pace, sit again. There's a woman in the next village who wears a veil every full moon. Says it's to keep out the moon-born thoughts. Another ties bells to her windows, so I'll hear if it tries to slip in. You used to laugh. Now you wonder. You light a candle, not because you need to see, just to feel less watched. There's a quirky practice nearby. People sprinkle salt on their doorstep during full moons, to confuse spirits that might try to enter. Spirits drawn to minds like yours, fractured ones, soft ones. You don't believe in spirits exactly, but you scatter the salt anyway. You stare out the window at the silver-lit world. Trees stand still as statues. The well glimmers like a polished coin. You half expect the madman from the square to wander into view, humming to the sky. He doesn't. Not tonight. You remember a scholar's notes you once overheard about how lunacy increases near coastal towns. The pull of the tides mirrors the pull of thought. Historians still argue whether these patterns were real or simply fear painted over coincidence. But you know this, something is louder on nights like this. Your sister finds you still awake near dawn. Moon kept you up again? You nod. She wraps a blanket around your shoulders, places a cup of warm milk in your hands. It's just the light, she says gently. It makes everything seem sharper, even the things we'd rather blur. You sip. The milk is sweet. You feel your limbs begin to soften, your thoughts settling like sediment in a glass. Later you sleep, deep and dreamless. The moon fades, and with it, the noise. Not gone, but quieted. Until next time. The monastery gate creaks open again. This time not for prayer, but for someone being brought in. You're nearby, dropping off a bundle of dried yarrow. When you see them, a boy, maybe 16, eyes vacant, wrists trembling, flanked by two red-eyed parents and a monk whose silence is louder than any hymn. The boy doesn't resist, but he doesn't walk with them either. It's more like he's being carried by the space around him. The monk nods to you as they pass. The boy doesn't look up. Later, you ask Brother Marcus what happened. He doesn't speak, he says softly, or sleep, or eat unless coaxed, but he's kind and empty. The monastery has a place for boys like him, not a prison, not a dungeon. A small stone room with soft light and smooth walls. A cot, a cross, a cup of water always fresh. A copy of the Psalms in worn ink. A carved wooden lamb with a broken leg. It's not much, but it's more than many get. In the medieval world, those with severe mental illness, especially children, were often hidden. If you were noble, you might be cloistered for your safety. If you were poor, you might be left at the church's door with a whispered prayer that someone, anyone, would take you in. Monasteries became sanctuaries, not just for prayer, but for people unfit for the world's rhythm. The term innocent was sometimes used, not legally, but spiritually. They cannot be blamed, the texts say. Their suffering is not sin. Historians still debate whether such care was truly compassionate or simply were these cloistered souls protected or silenced. You walk the perimeter of the cloister garden. You see the boy through an archway. He's sitting now, eyes following a bee. His lips move. Maybe prayer. Maybe memory. You recognize that distant stare. There's a fringe belief among certain monks that the truly silent are closer to angels than to men. That their minds have moved upward. That God speaks in that quiet, but in frequencies we can't hear. You're not sure about that, but you hope it's true. You sit with the boy sometimes now. You don't talk. You peel apples and leave the slices near him. He eats them, one by one. You hum a tune from the St. Elfrida festival. His eyes shift. He hums the next note. Progress. Some of the other monks don't approve. He should be chanting psalms, one says, not singing folk songs. But Brother Marcus shrugs. Joy is its own prayer. The boy begins carving again, tiny animals from wood scraps. One looks like a cat, another like a bee. You tell him they're beautiful. He doesn't answer, but he keeps carving. One day, you find a small figurine outside your door. It's a person kneeling, hands open, head tilted toward the sky. No name carved on the bottom, but it's from him. You place it by your window, not because it's sacred, but because he is. Winter presses in early this year. You wake to frost on the panes and breath like smoke in the air. The fields look dipped in powdered sugar, and the well's rope is stiff with ice. The village begins to quiet, not from celebration, but survival. Everyone draws inward, including you. The dreams return, slower now, not frantic, but heavy. Like stones dropped into deep water. You dream of locked doors, of voices calling your name from the wrong side of a wall. You wake with clenched fists and the taste of iron on your tongue. You don't tell your sister. Instead, you visit the healer. She doesn't speak, just hands you a vial of something dark and bitter, and tells you to take it slowly. Only when the thoughts lean too hard, she adds. You nod. You understand that lean. In medieval Europe, winter was known not just for hunger, but for melancholia. A darkness of the mind that mirrored the sunless sky. It was recorded in manuscripts and murmured by monks. The soul shrinks in the cold. Some believed the sun itself governed mental balance, and its absence stirred the black bile of sadness. Physicians prescribed warmth, color, even smells. Orange peels by the fire, yellow cloth at windows, candles with rose oil melted into the wax. Some towns held bonfires not just for heat, but to chase out the long shadow. Historians still argue whether these rituals were symbolic or sincerely medicinal. But as you hold your own candle near the fire, watching the wax curl like fingers, you think maybe they didn't care, so long as it helped. You keep moving, even on the cold days. You walk to the monastery with bread and carved beeswax animals. The boy with the quiet eyes now hums whole songs. His fingers are raw from carving, but his smile, when it comes, is real. You find that you miss the market's chaos, the madman's laughter, even the shouting children. You miss the mess of it all. So you return, slowly, gently. You stand in the square, clutching a tin of dried mint and lavender, and the hope that someone will still trust your hands. They do. A woman asks if you have anything for dread, not fear, dread. The kind that sinks into the chest like cold water. You hand her a sachet. Tell her to hang it near her pillow. Then walk, then breathe, then do it again. There's a fringe belief that if you name your sadness aloud under the full moon, it will answer back, but only once, and only honestly. You try it. You whisper, "Why do you come back?" The wind doesn't answer, but neither does it laugh. Your sister leaves a blanket at the foot of your bed. The healer leaves rosemary at your door. The boy leaves another carving, a small bird, wings folded in. You place it beside the kneeling figure. winter continues. But so do you. By spring, the village forgets the worst of it. The frost lifts. The bees return. Children shout again in the square, and the river stops sounding like a sigh and begins to laugh. You sit near the chapel wall, hands smelling faintly of thyme and lavender, and realize you've survived. Not heroically, not without bruises, but completely. The boy from the monastery visits the market now. He still walks with a softness, like someone who's been cracked open and carefully stitched back together. But he smiles more. He carves less. He talks, sometimes. And when he doesn't, no one minds. The madman still hums, still dances, still bows at odd angles to shadows only he sees. But now he's invited to sit by the fire when it rains. Someone gives him stew. Someone else braids his hair. He belongs. You begin to belong too. The healer calls you Little Root, which you pretend to hate. But secretly, you like it. Your herbs now hang in 4 households. A 5th is asking about anxiety. They don't use that word, of course. They say things like, a heart that won't still, or a mind too sharp in the wrong places. You understand exactly what they mean. You start keeping a small book, not for dreams, for truths, things you've learned through walking, waiting, breaking, and returning. Things like, the mind can fray quietly. Silence is not always sacred. Sometimes, a carved bee is better than a sermon. Healing doesn't mean forgetting. You are not a curse, a burden, or a mystery. You are here. You find yourself watching the moon differently now. Less like a threat, more like a companion who gets too intense sometimes, but means well. You still sleep with a ribbon tied around your wrist. You've replaced it 4 times. You like the weight. One evening, you gather the boy, the healer, your sister, and the madman, for no reason other than being. You bring bread. They bring stories. He hums. You laugh. And no one talks about healing. You just are. There's a fringe tradition among old weavers. At the end of each winter, they bury a knotted cord in the thawing earth. So the knots can unravel underground, they say, and not inside us. You bury one that night, a soft ribbon, once worn thin. The earth accepts it without question. The wind is warm. You are warm. And though your thoughts still wander sometimes, they now know their way home. So now, as the fire fades low, and the village sleeps once more, you let your breath slow. Let your limbs sink into the softness around you. You've wandered far tonight, through snow-dusted paths and prayer-heavy cloisters, across dreamscapes and feast fires, past silences both sacred and heavy. You've seen what the mind once meant in a world lit by candle and carried by myth. You've met people who hummed because speech was too much, who carved because pain needed shape, who wandered because stillness hurt more than motion. And somehow, you've come to understand them. Maybe even understand yourself a little more. The wind outside is gentle now, whispering through thatch and twig. The bees are quiet. The moon, if it rises, is pale and calm. There's nothing chasing you tonight. No thoughts too loud. No shadows too sharp. Just a stillness earned honestly, step by step, sigh by sigh. Let yourself rest in that. Let the stories settle like dust in a sunbeam, slow and golden. You are not broken. You are becoming. And that is enough. So loosen your fingers. Soften your brow. Let your breath deepen. You are safe. You are held. You are home.